So hello Marvin, Mayor of the City of Bristol. Thanks for receiving Bristol Cable for this interview. Some of these questions will have been crowdsourced from our social media. Last week you proposed a difficult budget that was approved at full council meeting. For those who don't really know, can you explain what the strategy behind this budget is?
Well, first of all, there's the overarching framework that is really important for us to understand, is that we must pass a balanced budget. You know, we can't spend more than we get in, and we can't just dig into our reserves as well. Our reserves are there we have to use some reserves, but so essentially we have to work within the financial envelope we've been given as a local authority. We're not national government where we can expand and contract, the money supply. And then within that, the strategy is to make sure we're committed to delivering our key pledges and also delivering on our wider themes, which are about making sure that it's a city in which people aren't left behind.
You have made challenging inequality like a central plank of the administration, and yet the budget has put forward some cuts to some crucial services such as social care, transport. What have you got to say in terms of to people who say that you're contradicting your electoral sort of pledges for your electoral campaign?
Would it be a contradiction if I had a bunch of money and I was choosing not to spend it on the things I want? Politics is not a case of you step into a room with a blank piece of paper and someone says, what do you want to do? And you can do it, and there are no blocks, there are no limits. It doesn't work like that. There are blocks and challenges to what we want to get done everywhere. I mean, that's the grown-up world we're in. So I've made these commitments. This makes it more difficult. Of course it does. Everyone acknowledges that. But authorities all over the country are facing the same challenges. Up in Liverpool, they were talking about going for a referendum on a 10% council tax increase. Surrey, famously, we're talking about 15%. Local governments are being hit very hard by government's austerity, and some of that might be political strategy on behalf. I don't know.
A lot of people are expecting a real challenge to central government with regards to the cuts to local authorities, and this is something that Labour voters would have expected. It's something that the Labour leader is very much putting forward, and a lot of people are expecting potentially you to stand up a bit more to central government.
Tell me what it looks like to stand up to central government. What's the vision? What's the visual picture of that?
I mean, I guess it's you talked about a strategy which would bring sort of core cities together.
Right, and we're doing that. We're meeting the housing minister in March to talk about, we're making a deal. They want 1 million houses by 2020. What we're working on, I just had a chat with Joe Anderson, the Mayor of Liverpool, the other day, and said when we go to that meeting, we need to be able to say, as core cities, we will give you 400,000 of that 1 million houses, whatever our number is, but this is what we need from you to be able to deliver it. So we give them the list of things that government need to do to support us, unlocking finance, giving us power during the viability assessment negotiation with private developers to do that, how we can protect people in private rental sector, powers, maybe even look at rent controls at some point, which obviously with national legislation don't allow us to do. So we're doing that. What are the ways?
You're being listened to by government?
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah.
We don't know yet.
Well, people are looking up to you in order to sort of, have some idea of what kind of a leadership, challenge could be sort of like brought in terms of.
Yeah, but what does the challenge look like? When working with core cities.
Essentially presenting the idea that it's impossible to run a council with the cuts that are being sort of.
Yeah, we're saying
that.
We're saying that. Councils all over the country saying that.
Sure.
I suppose there is a question about how do you relate to central government? How do you best challenge central government? I mean, one thing I think there is, and we can talk about this on another occasion as well, which is if as a local government, how do you manage your relationship with central government? So one of the things I had a group in the other day who initially came into the organisation protesting, and at the end of the chat, what they wanted me to do was get houses built. And you think about how much power central government have in relationship to local government in terms of housing. As I just said, we've got to go. We need the legislative support. We need them to give us support raising the finance. And the question I asked them was, in 2020, after they'd asked for all the houses to be built for the particular issue, I said, but it wouldn't be any good for me to turn up in 2020 and say, I'm sorry we didn't get any houses because we couldn't get the support of central government, we didn't get the legislative support, we didn't get the release of finance. But I just want you to know that I went in the papers and I really stuffed the Tories. What do we want? In local government, we're in power. And we're not a protest. I'm not a protest group. I'm a leader of a city. and my job is to get things done. I've got to get houses, I've got to get school places, a fair admissions process. I've got to find out a way of continuing to support Bristol's businesses to trade internationally in the face of Brexit, so that we can keep jobs here. I've got to find a way of making sure that the businesses are coming here so that we get the business rates paid in, because we're going to be totally business rate dependent, along with council tax, so that we can pay for the services we need for people. So, you know, I've got to find a way of working with government, and, you know, being in the papers, telling people that they are, you know, having a crack at national government, there may be a time when that needs to happen, and we will challenge policy.
Sure.
But my deal is right now, how do I get stuff for how do I make things happen for the people of Bristol?
What do you reckon is the sort of the long-lasting impact in terms of like the fabric of local authorities and the society that they support?
Yeah.
What will be the consequences?
So I'm going to say it's a crisis of local government. But what I would also say is every crisis is made up of opportunity and threat. Now the threat is that and what I would just, it's really important to say, the machinery of national government is not the same as the machinery of local government, right? We talk about government, but they're not, they're different beasts, and they work a different way. I think that the threat is that this rips the heart out of local government, right? And we go past a tipping point, that 38 degrees point of no return. But I think also there's an opportunity. And what I would say is, while people are lamenting about protecting local government, I grew up in the city and local government didn't work well for me. So there was no kind of day 15, 20, 30 years ago when this thing was purring along and poor people were getting all the services and feeling respected, and it was holding society together. And, you know, this time didn't exist. So there is an opportunity in the middle of all this to go back to some real deep questions about, well, what is the role of local government? What's it for? I would actually begin to call it, in a city, I'd call it city government, because I think we need to elevate it. Local makes it a second-class democratic institution. And we're pushing very hard at the moment. I'm actually up in Birmingham tomorrow speaking about city sovereignty, because we're saying that local politics is not second-class. We're not second-class to backbench MPs. We're doing real things for people, delivering real things, walking past people on the way to work.
The people who feel disgruntled about the impact of these cuts on local authorities, and almost a sense of disempowerment with regards to be able to stand up to central government. What would you say to these Bristolians that feel angry and want to actually do something, anything to help?
Should people feel frustrated and angry? I think they should. They should feel frustrated and angry. But then you've got to direct your firepower where it needs to go, and recognise that people are, you know, that people pursue their aims in different ways. And like I say, we are empowering Bristol. If I could spend my time with placards going up to London, would it make a difference if the minister just says, well, we'll just go and deal with the city, it's not causing me problems now? That wouldn't necessarily help Bristol. And if it doesn't help Bristol and doesn't help me, it doesn't help poor people in the city.
I guess a lot of the expectation is that voluntary or charitable or kind of community organisations and sectors can really deliver the services that the council can no longer really provide for itself. So when they most likely rely on that funding from the council, from government, in order to be able to run, how will they be able to manage without this kind of funding? And where will people find the money in order to be able to sustain stepping into what local government can?
And I recognise the challenge. I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, just to acknowledge it, I mean, organisations are often running on fumes, so I absolutely recognise that. But one of the things that we have to do then is look for alternative sources of finance. I think there's a big challenge to the business community. There's someone in said to me a few years ago, riots are not good for inward investment. So there's an interest in business in becoming place shapers as well. The other thing we need to do is, again, continue to improve our connectivity to sources of finance outside of local government, whether it's about local government entering into revenue raising activities or whether we're linking up with foundations. But it's not easy. I'm not claiming it's easy. I'm not claiming the budget is in line with one I would have wanted. And you know, didn't go into government to cut. But we also do need to say that there's an opportunity to think about what is local government. And like I said, African Americans were saying this in the 60s, particularly a lot of the black liberation theologians. The aim is not to get poor people onto a life dependent on government services. Sure. That's politically disempowering. Right. It's very important we have services for people that fall through the net. but we do not define our lives in terms of public services. That's not what we want. It's not what the middle classes are doing when they move to Bristol and become activists. They're not coming here to get government services, and they wouldn't want to live that life.
And we're talking about the element of gentrification, which is obviously like a concern. Making
massive
Bristol a
concern.
place that is appealing to business, and business having a place in order to be able to, create the kind of environment that can provide services that are no longer available because of these cuts. This city is kind of reshaping itself. Who is likely to fall down by the wayside?
It's a massive challenge. I mean, the Eastern I grew up in is unrecognisable today. I think the challenge is, and there isn't a challenge within progressive politics in Bristol, and I'll lay it out like this, that a number of the people who were really vocal about it are actually on the front end of gentrification. And all we need is a little bit of self-awareness within that. It's like I've sometimes suggested that, and don't necessarily do a good line in talking about race and class. So one of the provocative things, and I think it's worth a city conversation, sometimes people leading progressive movements, I'd say, are a bigger threat to anti-racism, for example, than overt racists. And I say this because I've been in situations where, and it happened at the night, Justice for Judah night the other day. Right. So there were some people there, great, right? They have the right political positions, they were on the left of the spectrum. That's but then two of them in a row stood up and said, it's not about race. I get it too. I'm an anarchist and I experience violence. We had to say, look, hold on, all right? Yeah. So what happens is people come to Bristol, they're politically progressive, they have the right positions on the environment, on inequality, but in the movements they set up, there aren't any working class voices, and there aren't any voices from Black and Asian people. And in that sense, they recreate the very kind of racial exclusion that they say they're fighting against. They begin to totally dominate the space of progressive politics. So the place that we would have the conversations about race and class, those conversations begin to get squashed in the face of their own political priorities, which has a passing reference to race and class, but doesn't really hold it at its core. So the voice of the poor gets squashed within those progressive movements, which is a challenge. And I'm not saying it's not an accusation. It's just an interesting area, I think, that would be very interesting to explore.
And I guess this is a good segue for the last question that I'll be asking, which is from a friend of mine, Nessam, who's an asylum seeker, and he's wondering really what is Bristol going to be doing about the issue of welcoming refugees and kind of potentially standing up to the Home Office.
Well, we've just written a letter to government, because actually I was a little bit irritated, to put it mildly, that when I saw ministers talking about no longer accepting children, they referenced local government and made it sound like they were protecting local government from that. So we've written to government and said, hold your horses, because actually we've said we will take children and we are willing to take children still. So we've actually got a very good situation at the moment where we've gone out to the city, working a lot through faith groups, mosques as well, and churches and other community-based organisations. And we've been asking for people who will come forward as a resource, as it were, to foster families and support families. Because what we don't want to do is bring a child here. We stick them on a house somewhere on the edge of the city, no access to people with the same culture, the language, the food, and they end up isolated, experiencing racial hate crime, and they end up in a worse situation than they were. So we are working on getting our resource together so we can bring people in. And the letter that's gone to government says, well, we have gone to the city, and there's an openness, there's a compassion within the city that is not just based on fluffy mindedness, but actually which is about the mobilization of real resource to offer the support structures that are needed for people coming here.
One last question: what are you proud of so far in terms of what you've done in the city, for the city?
I like the response we've had from, actually, in terms of from government, actually, if I can say, that I understand our reputation is changing. They know we want to get things done, and we're focused on getting things done for the city more than we are having a political knockabout. And there are a couple of incidents, I've had kids come in and I've just enjoyed being the mayor. I mean, in that sense, I'm still me, I'm just Marvin, right? But I know that there's something that goes along with my title. So if I visit my mum still lives on Stapleton Road, that I see people who I've always known, and it demystifies political leadership in the city. And I think those are some of the most fulfilling moments. And in fact, being at the Jamaican event on Saturday night was very fulfilling for me. And there were a lot of older Jamaicans who said, all the stuff we went through in the 60s, you know,
Let's-
we can see we've got something from it, and that was quite special.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about the event. I'll go and read about it.
Yeah, come to the big housing conversation. That's a good one.
All right, cool. Thank you very much for your time.
Take
Cheers.
care.